What you're looking at right now is a street in Ferrara, a mid-sized city in the Italian region of Emilia-Romagna. This is a city that hosts one of the most fascinating works of the Italian Renaissance, and was once referred to as the ideal city. This very street was part of the innovating urban plan known as the Addizione Herculea, designed by the urbanist Biagio Rossetti in the late 1400s. A human-scaled street layout that earned Ferrara the title of the first modern European city, one that inspired urban planning across the world, in building the cities of the future as we know them today. Ferrara is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Fast forward Alpha Millennium, and in 2025, many local associations and civic groups are raising concerns about one of the most frustrating issues in this very street and in other parts of the city center, a behavior all too common across Italy: illegal car parking. Ferrara also happens to be the first in Italy and one of the first in Europe to have achieved the highest rate of bicycle use for urban trips back in the 90s. With a background like that, you'd expect strong policies focused on road safety and people-first approach, right? Yet somehow, it feels like Ferrara has gone from being a model of urban planning to a place that today has very little left to teach and a lot to catch up on. Ferrara has a long history of urban cycling. It's often referred to as Città delle Biciclette or the City of Bicycles, a title proudly represented by the iconic bike-shaped sculpture located about 1 kilometer from the highway exit. This nickname is deeply rooted in the city's history and culture. Residents use bicycles daily, learning to ride from a young age. For anyone born and raised here, knowing how to ride a bike is as essential as knowing how to drive. Historical data confirms this cycling tradition. According to the city's official bike-focused website, as early as 1991, 30.7% of Ferrara's residents used bicycles for local trips, slightly more than Copenhagen, which reported 30% at the time. That level of usage led the city, starting in 1995, to develop numerous projects and initiatives aimed at improving and increasing bicycle use. Even today, about 90% of residents own one bicycle. You can see the results of this legacy just by walking around the city, whether in the historic center or in the outskirts. People on bikes, parked bikes everywhere. It's clear that cycling has long been a key part of daily life here, and it's just as clear that the city has heavily invested in this mode of transportation over the decades. But this is where tradition, historical data, and branding start to collide with the reality of today, or more precisely, the lack of current data. Despite its cycling heritage, Ferrara has been steadily becoming a car-first city, not a people-first one. A key moment in reshaping urban mobility in Italy came in 2017, when national law required all municipalities with more than 100,000 inhabitants to develop and adopt a SUMP, Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan. This later became mandatory for access to both national and European funding for sustainable transport projects. It marked a fundamental shift in thinking, from the old approach focused on vehicular traffic flow optimization to the new approach centered on people, not vehicles. Ferrara developed its own SUMP in 2019. The crucial point of SUMPs is that starting from a specific modal share for all trips within the city, you then need to set targets for short, medium and long term. And that's when Ferrara's plan starts to look strange. Ferrara used modal share data from 2011 and didn't bother to conduct a more up-to-date survey. The first thing I noticed is that biking only accounts for about 1/4 of trips, which is still lower than the widely claimed 30% figure found all over the web. Even more shocking is that 60% share attribute cars, and this data only covers systematic trips to school and work. However, today we know that society, especially after the COVID pandemic, has deeply changed, and also the way people get around. and such systematic trips represent only 30 to 40% of all daily trips, so that 2011 data cannot be considered representative. And let's be clear, Ferrara is not alone in this. The target by 2030 is to keep 10% pedestrian traffic, reach 20% transit use, 30% cycling, and 40% cars. But again, these percentages refer only to systematic trips, not overall trips. More data from 2013 and 2016 exists, but it was not statistically valid and therefore excluded. However, it's worth mentioning because those studies included free time and errand trips, thus more closely representing overall travel patterns. And they showed better results closer to what Ferrara aims to achieve by 2030. You can imagine my confusion here. To be fair, the strategies set in the SUMP aren't bad at all, and local associations agree. The most revolutionary proposal is to turn the entire historic center within the medieval walls into a large low-traffic zone and extend the 30 km/h speed limit to all local roads, not just residential areas, just like Bologna did. The plan also includes strong traffic calming measures, improvements to cycling infrastructure, and most importantly, a commitment to reduce road accidents by 2030, with particular attention to vulnerable users. The long-term goal is Vision Zero, no more road deaths. So how's the implementation of these changes going? Well, early this year, Ferrara made national news, apparently not so well. In 2022, Italy became the EU country with the highest motorization rate. And sadly, Ferrara is part of this trend. According to a 2024 report, Ferrara's motorization rate is 67 cars per 100 inhabitants, absurdly high compared to other European cycling cities of similar size, such as Innsbruck in Austria or Heidelberg in Germany, that both don't have a Mediterranean climate, and these cities show much less car use overall. That's a massive difference in the number of cars occupying public space. When it comes to accidents rate, Ferrara is above the national average and is not the safest city even within its own region. This is not the kind of data you would expect from a city known for cycling. Getting precise and up-to-date data is quite difficult. The SUMP promised monitoring and reporting every 2 years, but according to the local group, Ferrara Partecipata, the municipality has not provided any reports since 2019. Just recently, the municipality informed the same group that 8 people died in road accidents in 2023. Which is 20% fewer than 2019. However, looking at historical data from the National Istat database, similar or better numbers were seen in earlier years, before the SUMP was even in place, and possibly when there were fewer cars on the streets. Unfortunately, road accidents and injuries have actually increased compared to pre-COVID data. Ferrara Partecipata surveyed the city and found that only 10% of the policies planned by 2022 had been implemented. Local active communities are vocal and determined to demand change. The common feeling is that although the city has more low-speed areas and LTZs, the cycling infrastructure is increasing, there are still too many cars. Speed limits are often ignored, and roads feel less safe rather than safer. This is not unique in Italy, and it's the perfect time to go back to the first modern European street I mentioned earlier. Corso Ercole I d'Este. Since its design, Rossetti conceived it as a residential street and thus preserved it from noise and heavy traffic. There were no shops as today, and the street was not public, but used only by residents, their guests and servants, ensuring tranquility for important local figures, what we would call a Renaissance-era LTZ, with a touch of exclusive privilege. Since the early 2000s, the southern section has been a modern-time LTZ, with signs that prohibit parking and stopping. I find it incredible that the UNESCO World Heritage site allows car access, with a major road running right in front of some of the city's most important landmarks, like Palazzo Diamanti and Palazzo Prosperi Sacrati. In 2017, following non-stop complaints about illegal parking, the city added no parking and no stopping signs, also along the street. But apparently, that didn't work either. Something's happening though. Recently, the city council approved the transformation of the northern section into an LTZ with 30 km per hour speed limit. Yeah, the streets are still 50 km per hour. The decision came in response to, again, widespread illegal parking. Naturally, some people will complain, but this kind of resistance occurred in other countries too, just 30 years earlier. So, a significant share of trips in Ferrara is made by bike. But what about walking and transit? The two modes now with the lowest shares. Let's start from the train station. The front area is far from inviting. You're immediately greeted with a car lane with open access. I can already imagine parents waiting in cars to pick up someone. Oh wait, I don't even need to imagine it. There's a nearby parking lot with a few EV charging stations, but it doesn't function as a proper park and ride for train users. It's good that there are bus stops right in front of the train station, but when I first arrived, I was confused. There's one of each side of the road and I wasn't clear which served which lines. The pedestrian crossing is long and dangerous, just some paint on the asphalt, and it intersects with a bike path, creating inevitable conflict. Of course, people will walk wherever they can. It's not like there's no space to redesign this plaza. What it really needs is a full revamp, brought up to proper European standards. They also built a new bike parking facility near the station some years ago, and only in March 2025 did it get controlled access. It's essentially a fenced-off area with low-quality racks. The gate opens via the app, and it's free to use, at least. But for a cycling city, this feels pretty underwhelming. It was honestly the most disappointing part of my visit, especially when compared to places like Brixen with 1/3 of the population or Basel in Switzerland. And just to make things more counterintuitive, to access the bike parking, they decided to move the pedestrian space on the road. Well, I tried walking from the train station to the castle via an alternate route, because the most direct one looked like this. Via della Costituzione features wide protected bike paths. But if you notice, there's no official space for pedestrians. This desired path is apparently what you're supposed to walk on, or this tiny space. How is that even possible? And it's not just here. Other streets follow a similar pattern, dedicated bike paths, but barely any room for people on foot. As you continue, pedestrian space does improve, but then the bike infrastructure just ends, forcing you into the side roads. That's not terrible, but these side streets should definitely become bicycle streets with fewer parked cars. You've got to start somewhere, because if you don't, cars will get everywhere, like on the advanced stop lines for bikes or even on crosswalks, reducing visibility. Innsbruck is a great counterexample. And close to the castle, it's still frustrating to see how much space is given to cars, while the two-way bike path next to it feels squeezed. As expected, the city center is much more enjoyable. There are LTZs, pedestrian areas, lots of life, restaurants and events. It's not that large, but I've got no complaints there. Still, I get the distinct feeling that some drivers with access treat the city center like their personal parking space. And don't get me started on selling cars in pedestrianized areas. Nothing ruins the vibe more. You'll also see bikes parked everywhere, often where they're not supposed to be. I'm not defending that behavior, but let's be clear. Bike parking is awful. There just isn't enough of it. And what exists is often poor quality. Forget about high quality racks in Ferrara. The only decent ones I saw were here and in this newly pedestrianized plaza, which, by the way, used to be a parking lot. I remember how miserable it was to sit at a cafe surrounded by parked cars. Look at it now. No one will want to go back. Other streets like Corso Porta Po don't get the same treatment. This is Italy's version of the American Strode, a place that should be for people, but has become a high-volume car corridor with parking on both sides. Pedestrians are squeezed to the edges, like they don't belong here anymore. If you're on a wheelchair, forget it, you have zero right to exist here. At least they built a new protected crossing, probably because there's a school just right there. Trust me, it makes a difference. Still, the white lanes invite speeding, and it's easy to imagine what the average driver does here. You'll get nowhere without a redesign of space. I can't leave out the recent urban regeneration that took place a few years ago in the southern section of the Darsena waterfront. This area had long been neglected, but it's been now transformed into a much more livable space, with greenery near the canal where people go to walk, eat, and for live music. The project also added new pedestrian and cycling paths that didn't exist before, creating new links to existing routes leading to the historic center. The northern part of the area saw a much needed road diet and the creation of a new pedestrian zone lined with trees. This change was long overdue. Crossing this area on foot from the southern part of the city used to be terrible. So I really have nothing negative to say about this part of the urban regeneration. It was very well done. What I want to focus on though is the new parking lot known as XMOF. This project in the SUMP was described as essential to the low traffic zone plan for the city center, a way to push car traffic to the edges of town. XMOF is located right at the southern edge of the future LTZ, and the original plan was to turn it into a proper mobility hub with bus tickets included in the price, essentially a park and ride facility. But what actually happened? The municipality made sure this new parking area was sold as absolutely free to use, without any mention of transit hub or interchange. Not only did the lot become even larger than before, but the city also added more free parking spaces in the surrounding regenerated area. You see, in a car-dependent society, nothing sells better than free parking. Let me explain. I know that many of the things I said in this video will sound very unpopular to the average citizen, and I am aware I'll get some hate in the comments. And I get it. When a city like Ferrara has been built around car dependency, any policy that tries to redistribute space more fairly feels like an attack on cars. From that perspective, the backlash makes sense. But here's something to think about. No city, absolutely no city in the world, has ever improved by adding more car parking. And even worse, free parking. In a car-based society, we've equated freedom with going wherever I want, whenever I want in my car. But what about the child who can walk to school safely? The elderly person stuck at home because there's no bus? The person spending half of their income on a car they didn't want? That's not freedom either. True freedom is the ability to move safely, affordably, and independently even without a car. And while the loudest voices are often the angriest drivers, there are many people, quietly, who want safer streets for their kids, are tired of noise, pollution, and constant car expenses, and would gladly trade a few parking spots for a better, more livable city. Unfortunately, what's being done today feels a lot like what was done over the past 50 years. It's not really the project itself, but rather how it has been presented. Take the Diamanti parking garage, right in the heart of the historic center. It costs just 50 cents per hour with a €2 a day maximum. No other European city of similar size offers such a cheap parking in the city center. And now with this new lot being marketed simply as absolutely free, it's clear where this is headed. Free parking has never solved traffic problems. These kinds of offerings only lead to one outcome, again and again: induced demand, and with it, more traffic and more cars. This is not what Ferrara's SUMP was meant for. Still, let's try to stay optimistic. And maybe this is just a transitional phase. For transit, I didn't have a great experience with it. Public transport in the city relies entirely on buses, and the biggest issue is frequency. There are two main bus lines that run with decent frequency in the central area: Line 11, which goes north-south, and Line 6, which runs east-west every 15 minutes. That's actually quite good, especially Line 6, which connects to the hospital. However, the rest of the network operates only every 30 minutes. That's simply not enough for a city of this size, and I've tested it myself. I used the Move It app, which is officially recommended by the local transit company, T-Per. It lets you check routes and real-time locations. Sounds good, right? Well, the first time I tried Line 3, that took a completely different route, with no notice on the app. No temporary reroute info, nothing. The second time, Line 2 had a stop that was temporarily closed. The app didn't say anything, and going to the next stop would have meant waiting too long, so I just walked. Then it happened again on line 4. This time it affected my parents, who couldn't walk far, and they were trying to reach the train station. Guess what? They had to walk too. And eventually I figured out why. Instead of simply updating the app, they expect users, yes, including tourists and occasional riders, to go to the company's website just for fun, find the news section, dig through it to see if their line is affected, and decipher something like Deviazione mercatale del venerdì or Friday market detour. No map is provided, so good luck tracing the detour manually, and good luck hoping your alternative option isn't affected either. I'm not making this up. And by the way, service ends at around 8 PM if you're lucky. And we're really that surprised the ridership numbers are so low. Not all is lost. The bus lines I mentioned, line 3 and 4, are currently being electrified. A few months ago, construction began on the new charging stations at the main train station, which is a promising development. It's still unclear whether this will also lead to better service frequency. But it's actually on the rail front that Ferrara is undergoing its most significant transformation, especially in terms of urban regeneration. Back in the 2000s, the city launched the Metropolitana di Superficie project, a surface railway with several urban stops planned along the southeastern section of the city. However, the project never really took off over the past 20 years. It had all the surface railway features, but nothing of the metro part. Take the stop near the hospital, for example. Train frequencies there range from every 2 to 4 hours. I'm not joking. Wanna guess how many people used that station per day in 2019? Just 51. Ferrara is emblematic of how public transport and non-car infrastructure more broadly has often been treated in Italy as an afterthought. A few years ago, the same railway line was included in the rail trenching project, and it's the most ambitious urban and engineering challenge Ferrara has ever faced. The plan involves removing the level crossings that have split the city in two for decades, creating long queues, building 2 new underground stations, and converting the surface level tracks into a green pedestrian and cycling path. This is exactly the kind of project that should have been done decades ago. Now, once it's completed and fully electrified by 2025, the question remains, will we finally see trains running at least every 30 minutes or less, just like a metro service? And finally, it's time to talk about the real protagonist of Ferrara, the bicycle. If the city has reached such a high share of trips by bike, then clearly something was done right over the decades. There's no doubt that the extent of the cycling network is impressive. 218 kilometers as 2024. The main backbone is the ring path around the medieval walls, which is mostly recreational, and several radial connections branching off from it. The rest of the network is definitely above the Italian average, but still in many ways mediocre. Because having a lot of kilometers of cycling infrastructure doesn't necessarily mean it's good, usable, or even connected. The SUMP talks about improving infrastructure quality, but it stays vague about how and where exactly this will happen. That's likely because the city chose not to adopt the BC plan, a detailed planning document specifically for cycling traffic that by law cities of this size must have. Without it, the plans seem more like a wish list than a roadmap. In practice, here's what it looks like. If there's enough space that you won't bother cars too much, that you might get decent bike space. Otherwise, most routes are shared with cars or pedestrians. Even where there's a separate path, it's often so narrow that people walking and biking inevitably overlap. Currently, the main access through the historic center offer almost nothing for cycling. Take the Corso Porta Po we've seen before. For example, it's not a bad street on its own, but it's 50 km per hour and busy, which makes it quite uncomfortable to bike safely. The city provides the future cycling network of 2030. and that helps you understand that the majority of it will still be shared with pedestrians. And the map isn't always reliable. For instance, it claims there's a connection from the train station to the university, but there isn't. Or take this recently built segment labeled as dedicated cycle path, but is clearly shared with pedestrians. And I think with this, we've also explained why walking share is so low. I like to simulate real-life usage, and this time I had to go to Decathlon. So I figured, perfect chance to test biking. And what's the ideal spot for a store that promotes sports, active lifestyles and cycling in a bike-friendly city? In the middle of nowhere. No bike access, no sidewalks, and no public transit. I had high expectations, so I contacted the store. A very kind employee replied with detailed instructions, and even asked me to help pressure the municipality to improve access. So this video is also for you. Glad to help. My trip started at Piazza Duomo, heading south on Via Bologna. And here I got a real taste of what low quality infrastructure means. Some residential areas in the south have newer bike lanes and low speed limits, though the road design doesn't always reflect that. And then the pleasure of biking here. Now imagine doing this with kids or at night, so safe. Decathlon, clearly aware of the situation, installed a simple bike rack, something you'd expect to see in an American big box store parking lot. On the way back, there were still plenty of people biking. When I saw elderly riders, I started asking myself, how did Ferrara reach such a high level of bike use with such an inviting infrastructure? Maybe I'm just spoiled by Northern Europe's standards. Maybe the point is that all it takes is starting with something, even if it's not perfect, and people will still come? Let me know in the comments. I also biked through what's probably one of the newest renovated roads with painted bike lanes, and honestly I don't mind it. If only the road had lower speeds and less dooring risk, but at least this one sends a new message. This street isn't only for cars, it's not the 70s anymore. Subscribe if you'd like to know more. I'm planning a video on why Italian cities are still so far behind the rest of Europe. So, is Ferrara still the city of bicycles? Compared to the average Italian city, absolutely. But it falls far short of many European cities, even those without a deeply rooted cycling tradition. Ferrara had a unique opportunity, an intact cycling culture preserved over the decades, to become a true national model for a people-first city. But the potential has been mostly wasted. Ferrara today still looks and feels more like a car-first city. A good first step would be simply applying its own SUMP, which proposed turning back the first modern European street in what it was meant to be, a safe space where children can walk and bike to school, not a place when they're taught to get dropped off at the gate. Most Italian cities will struggle to reach Ferrara's current level of bike use even in 10 years. So rather than only focusing on bike infrastructure, Ferrara must prioritize public transport and quality public space, adopting a shared space approach where needed. And the only way to make that happen is, yes, you guessed it, reducing car use and ownership, in line with European standards. The national and EU policies are crystal clear. The system is no longer sustainable. Ferrara must move faster and make bold choices to become, once again, a modern, livable city where the only acceptable number of road deaths is 0. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you. Research, digging data, finding the right people to talk to, and editing all take a lot of time, and I'm doing it all for free. If you'd like to support my work, consider subscribing, or you can donate a coffee as a one-time donation through the link in the description. As I prepare to leave Ferrara for my next stop, Padova, to explore how its tram network shaped urban space, I took a moment to enjoy the last minutes of the day in the main square with this incredible sunset. I found myself mesmerized by the mix of people moving through the city, walking, biking, talking, a beautiful organized chaos, knowing without any doubt the precise reason why people chose to spend their evenings here. Thanks for watching.